In the previous video, we have seen that the fatty acids which are produced by the action of the bacteria, they are taken up by the ruminant. Now, here in the second part, we are taking up the fermentation reaction in the rumen. Now, this is a very simple equation. As we have discussed earlier that the bacteria, they require glucose for anaerobic respiration. So this glucose is also fermented in the rumen. So here glucose, it is converted into ethanoic acid, carbon dioxide and methane. So this is the reaction, this is in the reaction form that we have discussed earlier, that how methane is produced in the rumen. Now there is a question that how cattle can survive on a diet which is very low in proteins. So as every animal, it requires quite a big amount of proteins in the food. But how these ruminants, how the cattle, they can survive on a diet which is very low in protein? Now the answer to this question, it is the bacteria, which are the microorganisms which are found in the stomach. Now the nitrogen, it may be taken that is not a part of the protein. For example, urea. So here I want to emphasize that the cattle or the ruminants, they can take nitrogen from urea. Now this urea, it is formed inside the bodies of the ruminants or the cattle. And this urea may be the source of nitrogen for the cattle. So that's why cattle, they don't require protein in their food. So this is one of the answers to this question. Now some bacteria in the rumen, they use urea as a source of nitrogen to make protein. This is a very important point. So you must keep it underlined that some bacteria, they use urea as a source of protein making. So this is a very important point. This protein is used for bacterial reproduction. So as we have discussed earlier that the bacteria, they can take up glucose and they can take up the energy from glucose and they can proliferate, they can grow. So here there is a second point that these bacteria, they also use urea to make proteins, and these proteins, they are helping in their growth, in their reproduction. Some bacteria, they are swallowed with the chewed cud. So what happens? That the bacteria, they are producing this protein from urea. I think this is very much clear to you. The bacteria, they are using urea and they make protein. And while the cattle is eating the food, some of the bacteria from the rumen, they are taken up into the next chambers. And those bacteria, they go to the intestine of the cattle. And now these bacteria, they are serving as a food for the cattle. So some bacteria, they are swallowed with the chewed cud. The bacterial protein is then digested in the abomasum and duodenum as in other mammals. So if these bacteria, they are taken up from the rumen to the next chambers, so the protein is also going along with them. So when this protein it reaches abomasum or the true stomach, it is digested over there. So the amino acids which are produced from these bacterial proteins are absorbed in the small intestine and are used to make cow protein. So this is a very important aspect of mutualism. As bacteria are taking up glucose, bacteria are using urea for making protein, and the cow is eating these bacteria as food. Some of the bacteria will go along with the food, and the proteins of these bacteria, those will be digested, and the amino acids will be used for making cow protein. So this is a very important point. So you may get a question on what is cow protein. Okay, now the bacteria, they have converted the waste urea into protein to supplement their diet. So this is again a very important line, which is it is in connection with the second line, which is some bacteria in the rumen use urea as a source of nitrogen to make protein. So these bacteria, they have converted the waste urea into protein, and this protein is also useful for the bacterial reproduction, and this protein is also useful for the cow for making cow protein. So this is mutualism. Okay, now this is again a very important part in the ruminant stomach. This is the recycling of urea. As we have studied that urea is formed in the stomach of these ruminants. So now we have to see that how it is recycled. Okay, now we have to see this diagram. This is a very simple diagram. So first of all, what happens in the liver, deamination of amino acids, it occurs. Now these amino acids, these may be from the bacterial proteins, as we have discussed in the earlier slide, that the bacteria, they use urea for making bacterial proteins, and those bacterial proteins are digested, and now this liver of the host, this liver of the ruminant, it has deaminated those amino acids, the bacterial amino acids, and this reaction, the deamination reaction, it produces urea. So this urea is produced by the action of the liver inside the ruminant. Now this urea may be given out, or it may be excreted out in the urine simply, as it is being done in ourselves also, in humans. But in ruminants, there is one more recycling method, which is that this urea is mixed with the saliva. This is a very important point, that this urea, it is given to the saliva, and while regurgitation, when the chewing of the cud is taking place in the mouth of the ruminant, this urea is mixed with the food, and this urea is going into the rumen again. So here you should see that this urea is reaching ultimately the rumen of the stomach of the cattle, and from here this urea will be taken up by the bacteria to form bacterial proteins. Those proteins will be digested by the cattle, and amino acids will be formed, and amino acids will be deaminated in the liver, as here it is shown in the first step. Those amino acids will give urea again, and that urea will again mix with the saliva. It will again go to the rumen. So this is a cycle. So that's why it is called as a recycling of urea in ruminants. So you may get a small question on recycling of urea in ruminants. So you must be aware of this cycle. Now we have reached the top of the ruminant stomach digestion physiology. So this is the nitrogen metabolism in ruminants. So first of all, I will be showing you some of the primary slides of nitrogen metabolism, and after this we'll be taking up the peculiar cycles, very broad cycles of nitrogen metabolism. So if we see this slide, you will be seeing that grass is taken up by the cattle. It is taking grass as the food. This grass has been mixed with the saliva and the urea. Now here the urea is coming from the recycling, as we have discussed in the previous slide. So this grass is mixed with the saliva and urea. So we'll be going step by step. Now this urea and grass, it will be going into the rumen of the cattle. Now here, this urea and the grass protein, here why we have written grass protein, that this protein is taken up by the bacteria again, which are present in the rumen. So those proteins will be taken by the bacteria. Now after entering into the rumen, this grass protein is taken up by the bacteria, and bacteria, they grow with the help of these proteins. The bacteria, they are also using the urea as the nitrogen source. So both urea and grass protein, they are used by the bacteria for making bacterial proteins, and these proteins, they help in the reproduction of the bacteria, and the bacteria grow in number in the rumen. So this whole box, the yellow box or the cream box, it denotes the rumen of the ruminant. Now after this, the cellulose part of the grass, it is digested by the cellulase enzyme. Now as we all know that this cellulase is given by those bacteria which are present in the rumen. So this cellulase is converted into glucose. Now this glucose is used by bacteria, as we have earlier discussed. Now this glucose is taken up by bacteria, and what is formed? Methane, carbon dioxide and fatty acids are formed. So this is all happening in the rumen. Now if we see methane and carbon dioxide, they are not required by the host. They are not required in the rumen. They are not required by the ruminant. So they will be given out. The remaining fatty acids, they are important. So fatty acids and the protein from the rumen part, they are taken into the abomasum part of the stomach. So this is the true stomach. So here the green box is denoting abomasum and duodenal part. Now here the fatty acids, they are absorbed and they are used, they are assimilated for making energy. The energy is used. The proteins, they are converted into peptides and then to amino acids. They are again absorbed and they are used for making either proteins or they are used for making energy. Now the glands that are found in the stomach or the abomasum, they have been named according to their location. So you can write it on your copies. The glands located on the cardiac part of the stomach, they are called as cardiac glands. Those located on the fundus and the pyloric parts, they are called as fundic and pyloric glands, respectively. The fundic glands, they are of greatest importance in digestion. So there are three types of fundic glands, as they have been seen in mammals also. They are mucous neck cells. Second are the chief cells, and third are the parietal cells. So the secretion on the whole of the abomasum is known as the gastric juice. So it may contain mucus, the HCl or the hydrochloric acid. It may contain pepsin, rennin, and gastric lipase. So this is the combination of enzymes in the gastric juice. The concentration of the gastric HCl, it can vary depending upon the type of the food that has been eaten up by the animal. So that was the overall nitrogen metabolism in the case of stomach of ruminants. Now if we see this slide, this is a very peculiar slide of digestion and utilization of protein by the cattle. Now if you see on the top, on the left, we have written diet. So what is diet? It is the protein, urea and other NPN sources. Now the protein is taken inside the rumen. It is degraded into ammonia. It is subjected to microbial proteins to form microbial protein or the bacterial protein. After rumen, when it goes to abomasum, it is converted into protein, and this protein is broken down into amino acids, and the protein which is undigested, it is given out in the feces. It is denoted in the very lower side. Now in the abomasum, the amino acids which are formed, they are taken up into the liver, they are converted into ammonia, they are again converted to urea, and this urea may go back to saliva, it may go back to the rumen as we have earlier discussed. The amino acids in the liver may go for metabolism, and the urea which is formed in the liver, it may be given out in the urine or it may go back to the saliva and the rumen cycle. So this is the recycling of urea. In this particular figure, you can see the digestion and utilization of carbohydrates. So here the diet is carbohydrates. They are taken into rumen. The fermentation of carbohydrate, it occurs. Three things are formed. Number one, fatty acids. Number two, methane. Number three, carbon dioxide. So as you can see on the right side of the rumen box, methane and carbon dioxide, both gases, they are lost by eructation, so they are given out. The remaining fatty acids, they are going for the body tissues and they are subjected to the tissue metabolism after absorption. So from rumen itself, they can be absorbed into the blood, from where they can enter the tissue metabolism. The unfermented carbohydrates from the rumen, they enter the abomasum and the intestine. So here they are converted into sugars. Now these sugars, they also enter the bloodstream and they go to the tissue metabolism after absorption in the intestine of the ruminant. At the very end, undigested carbohydrates, they are given out in the feces. So this is a very good overall cycle of digestion and utilization of carbohydrates. So here the most important thing is occurring in the rumen part of the stomach, that is the fermentation process, which is making fatty acids, methane and carbon dioxide. This diagram, it shows the digestion and utilization of fat by the cattle. So whenever the cattle is taking up the raw food, both saturated and unsaturated fat, they are taken up in the diet. Now here, the saturated and unsaturated fat, they are both converted into saturated kind of a fat by the rumen. So this is a very important point. So this fat is taken as such by the abomasum, and this fat is degraded or digested and it is taken in the tissue metabolism through the blood, and the undigested fat, it is simply given out into the feces, which is shown at the very end of this diagram. So this is the digestion and utilization of fat by the cattle. So these three diagrams, they have given you the whole lot of idea what is the physiology of the three types of foods which are of the nutrients which are taken in along the food: the proteins, the carbohydrates and the fats. Now this part of the video, it is altogether different from the previous ones. So as we all know that invertebrates, they are known for their cellulose digestion. So the case of invertebrates will be taken up in the later videos. So in this part of the video, I must emphasize on the importance of this question as per your examinations are concerned, that this is a very important topic. You may get a full-fledged question on symbiotic nutrition. You may get a question on the protein digestion. You may get a question on formation of fatty acids. You may get a question on bacterial protein formation. You may get a question on fermentation process. You may get a question on the recycling of urea in ruminant stomach. So these are some of the aspects which you should know at the very end of this topic. Okay, that's all for this topic. Thank you.